All right. Welcome back to All Cars, my friends. My name is John, and it is time for another Motorweek Retro Review reaction video. This time it is the 1987 Jeep Wrangler. Now, I will not pretend that I am not going to be biased about this one. I love this generation of Wrangler. I, in fact, loved what Jeep was doing in this late 80s, early 90s, and I owned one of these. Now, the one I owned, I think it was a 91. I don't really remember, but I'm a huge fan of it. And I don't think the Jeep as this exists today. So I'm really excited to take this personal trip down memory lane for myself. I've got my rose-colored glasses securely attached to my face, and I want to see what Motorweek said about it when it was brand new. So as always, grab your beverage of choice. We've got just some water this afternoon. Sit in your comfy chair, and let's you and me just reminisce a little bit.
Your host for Motorweek, John Davis.
Hello and welcome again to Motorweek. Well, it had to happen. Sooner or later, you know, the good old boy of the battlefield and backwoods, well, it's become upwardly mobile. The result is in our first road test. It's still a Jeep, but now it's the Wrangler. Later on, it's everybody's idea of a dream combination of sport and luxury in the same package, the Jaguar XJS. Pat Goss has his usual package of advice on car problems, and Beth Nardone will tell us what's happening with two future imports, the Renault 21 and the Subaru Justy. But in the meantime, let's see what has been happening at Jeep. Plenty, as it turns out. Since in 1985, AMC sold more Jeeps than ever before. Some 35,000 of them were the venerable open-bodied CJ, a veteran that's been around since before there even was an American Motors Corporation. And now, just when a whole new class of buyers are discovering Jeeps, AMC decides to replace the CJ with this all-new model. It's called the Wrangler. Why now? Well, let's turn to the fuller explanation department.
So before they go on, so here's the deal. Back in the 80s, my best friend had a CJ5, 72 or 74 model. I don't remember exactly. And that's where I found my love for Jeeps. It was not terribly reliable, not terribly powerful. In my first car, when I turned 18, I went and bought a 66 Jeep CJ5. Now, it had been heavily modified by the people who owned it before me. It was the singular most unreliable car I've ever owned in my life. I kept it for 1 year, and it was horrible. It really was. But that was the fault of the previous owners, not the car itself. And so when I graduated from college, I bought a used Jeep. Now, I was a little bit of a purist. I hated the square headlights. I hated the half doors. Why couldn't I have cloth doors? Why didn't I have circular headlights? But the more I looked and the more I drove it, the more I loved it. And now it's quite honestly probably my favorite Jeep. I'm glad they went back to circular headlights, I guess. But this was, look at this. This looks low. This looks somewhat wide. It looks big but small at the same time. I think it is exceptionally well designed. And honestly, having the half doors and being able to take off the top part of them, I loved it. I absolutely love driving it. And I think it looks fantastic. I think it looks iconic. And I deeply, deeply, deeply respect it.
As you might expect, the reasons are varied. The last CJ was a direct descendant of the first Jeep and shared many components with the latest military version. But Uncle Sam has stopped buying Jeeps, preferring instead new types of battlefield runabouts. Thus, cost of building the CJ or civilian Jeep could no longer be shared with the armed forces. Since not enough open-bodied Jeeps are sold to warrant totally exclusive components, another source had to be found. That source for the Wrangler, or YJ, is the XJ Cherokee Wagoneer series introduced in 1984. The Wrangler shares major assemblies such as steering gear, brakes, axles, manual transmission and clutch, plus the transfer case with the Cherokee and Wagoneer. This means that all Wranglers come with auto-locking hubs and a part-time transfer case that can be engaged while moving. There's even a 4x4 dash indicator. This gives the Wrangler off-road and bad weather four-wheel drive convenience not known on the CJ. And convenience gets us to another reason for the Wrangler. The Wrangler YJ is being referred to as the yuppie Jeep.
Okay, before they get to the interior, I'm just going to rehash. I love the styling. I really do. Admittedly, I don't like the little bumperettes they've got on the rear. I'd like a real bumper. Okay. But the fact is, if somebody rear ends you, they're going to hit the tire. That's going to smash that gate in to begin with. It is what it is. But I love it. And I want to stress here that Jeeps are such a profit center for Stellantis now. And they keep getting bigger. And the last one I actually got in, I was surprised. It looks big, but it feels small. It feels honestly tighter than I remember this one being 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And I'm not sure why. And it feels much higher. This one, so what I'm struggling with is when other people have spring fever and they start thinking about motorcycles or buying a Miata, for me, it's Jeep. I've always thought a Jeep could do everything a car does, but more, thanks to its four-wheel drive and its off-road ability. And to me, it represents the same freedom that people have when they drive sports cars, convertible sports cars. That's what Jeep means to me. And I remember my Jeep being a step in and maybe a slight bump up. I don't have terribly long legs, so the seat was low. But the current ones, they feel a lot taller, just overall. So they're big, they're heavy, but they're tight, and they're tall, and they're expensive. Base ones like this were not. I lament the loss of a Jeep Wrangler like this, and I will continue to use what tiny platform I have here to advocate for a four-wheel drive, four-cylinder, 5-speed, lower Jeep Wrangler. That's much more affordable. Let's see what they say about the interior.
So AMC wanted to make even its most rugged Jeep with more convenience inside too. Gone is the painted steel dash and rudimentary controls. Now it's modern with a full gauge package standard. Only the low-flung light controls seem poorly placed. Lever vent and radio controls are housed in the center for easy access. And if you have doubts about the no-frills approach being gone, even a cellular phone is an option. The standard, sport, and Laredo trim levels all come with steel doors. The standard soft top has removable upper door sections, while the optional hard top continues with full doors. But the windshield will still fold flat. The seats are high buckets and were one of the few things we found lacking in the Wrangler. The need for good roll bar protection dictated a somewhat short, thin, and narrow bottom cushion. There's also little back support for long trips. Leg room is limited for the passenger since the right seat still has no fore and aft adjustment. There are running boards now with a built-in step, and both front seats fold forward for easy entry aft. In the rear is a folding seat that can also be removed to make way for cargo. The CJ's drop-lid tailgate has been replaced on the YJ with a swing-away design that conveniently takes the spare tire with it.
Okay, so before they move on, this, you've got to keep this in perspective, and they kind of hit on it there. This was a leap forward for the Wrangler, for the CJ series of the dash, right? My first Jeep literally was just, again, painted metal with a big speedometer, a couple of gauges kind of scattered around. This one actually showed a touch of ergonomics, just a touch. You're not going to mistake this for a Toyota design. And if you want to look back on it from now, it's a brutally bad dash. It really is, I think. cheapest plastic they could find, small gauges, smaller gauges over here, small controls. Come on. I don't remember the passenger seat not moving forward and aft. That was interesting. But on the other hand, I don't ever remember driving mine, and I owned it for several years, and thinking it was lacking in anything. You know, that dash was, well, heavier duty, right? It held up. The gauges were fine. Once you figured out where everything was, the gauges were fine. I'm not going to pretend this was a great interior. It was fully, I think, 10 years behind the times in dash design. I really do. But they did what they could, and it worked, and it was simple, and I loved it for that. Cargo area, extremely limited. With the seats in the back, you could take them out, and then you could put a bunch of stuff back there. Great for two people to go away for the weekend, but suddenly you're looking at something that's more of a two-person car, right, than a four-person car. And that's why people screamed for the four-door Wrangler to come out. Still, as a single person and as a young married person, it met all of my needs and carried everything I ever needed at any specific time.
At first glance, the YJ, as it's being called in Canada, looks much like a CJ with square headlights. But despite similar dimensions, the Wrangler has a lower center of gravity, wider front and rear tread, and it has an overall squattier look, all while actually increasing moving ground clearance. This means the Wrangler should be much less prone to rolling over than the CJ. Billions of dollars in lawsuits against Jeep over CJ rollover accidents was another reason behind the debut of the Wrangler. We found the Wrangler very stable in a slalom, much more so than most of its larger off-road competition. There is much less body roll in the Wrangler, and the steering is quick if extremely numb in road feel. But the biggest thing you notice is the tipsy feeling of the CJ is gone. However, we feel anyone who drives any off-road vehicle like a sports car is a lunatic. Just to be safe.
Okay, that's pretty funny. I'm glad they said it that way. If you drive an off-road vehicle like a sports car, you're a lunatic. What a change in the past 35 years, right? To today, when we have companies like Porsche and Range Rover and others who are like, look at my incredibly powerful sport utility. Regardless, going back, that was unbelievably stable. I imagine the payoff or the downside is a harsh ride. I bet they're going to say something about that. But that stiff suspension, we have seen cars on these retro reviews that have a lot more body roll than that thing did going through the slalom. And that short wheelbase made it feel not sporty, that's not the word, but agile. That's the word. Numb steering, you know what? I'm going to sit here and reflect real quick. No, I never remember feeling the road at all.
The YJ has heavy roll bar protection on the sides as well as behind the front seats. The Wrangler's turning circle is also smaller than the CJ, a good 34 feet from cowpath to mudhole. Engines include AMC's single-point fuel-injected 2.5-liter 4. Optional and recommended is this carbureted 4.2-liter inline 6. A 5-speed manual is standard with both engines. Our top-line Laredo had the 6 with an automatic and managed a very respectable 13.9-second 0 to 60 run. Low-end torque is abundant. Wrangler ride is noticeably better both on and off-road than the CJ, despite a retention of leaf spring suspension. The short wheelbase can produce porpoising on roads with regular tar strips, but that's typical of its breed. However, while the old model was very susceptible to crosswinds, the Wrangler is not.
So I laughed during that because I respect that 4.2. not my favorite engine in the world, but I do respect it. But the one I had that 2.5 liter. And I loved the engine. I really did. It was crude, and it felt like it was 10 or 15 years old design, right? But it had so much torque. It really was I loved the engine. I wasn't building mine to do rock crawling, right? I tootled around on it for 51 weeks out of the year. And then about once a year, I went to the beach. I went to the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and I bought this vehicle to drive on the beach. And it was perfect. Absolutely loved my 4-cylinder 5-speed combination. It was crude, I'll admit. Again, you're never going to listen to that AMC engine and think, wow, Honda. But it had gobs of torque. That's the one thing I remember about it. Now, before I do these videos, I don't go look up anything in advance, and I have not looked up the stats for this engine, the numbers on it. But what I remember was just gobs of torque. Oh, man, I miss that vehicle.
That's because even with a similar boxy look, many corners are smooth for better airflow. The upright grille is creased and tilts slightly back at the bottom, and the hardtop side glass is flush mounted. The Wrangler retains separate body and frame construction. Splash shields and rock protection appear excellent. While the Wrangler is heavier than the CJ, its slightly more aerodynamic shape kept fuel economy ratings nearly the same. Our Laredo 6-cylinder auto is estimated at 16 city, 18 highway. We managed 18 on our economy loop. So what's the conclusion? Is the Wrangler still all Jeep? You bet, and better. We like its improved stability and civilized ride. The shift-on-the-fly transfer case and auto-lock hubs improve its convenience. Plus, the interior design brings it solidly into the modern automotive world. Negatives? Well, the seats are not suitable for long terms in the saddle, and more right seat footroom is needed. The steering could also use more driver feel. But the Wrangler YJ is a big step forward for open-bodied Jeeps. It's changed just enough to make it also appeal to a new class of buyers, yet it retains its originality. Enough so that the open-bodied Jeep is recognized around the world as the most distinctively American vehicle ever.
And you see what they have on this one right here. Steel wheels. And I've said it on the channel already before, but where is this? Where are you, Jeep? Now, the answer is, they said earlier that they sold like 35,000 CJs, and that's not enough. I don't know what Jeep sells now, but it's substantially more than that. The Wrangler, this was the first step, right? This was the yuppie Jeep. This was going to compete with the, to a lesser extent, the Ranger Splash that came out later, the Isuzu Amigo, the Suzuki Samurai, the Geo Tracker, the off-road somewhat ability, but you could also be doled up and be on Rodeo Drive in it. And Jeep Wrangler kind of went down that path. I'm not trying to take anything away from their capability. I still respect them for those who are into the off-roading their vehicles. It still has all that. But because of increasing sales and because they're making just gobs of money by the truckload, they don't have to offer base level models. Now, this was not the basest of the base. I think mine was an S. It was either just a Wrangler or a Wrangler S. It was the bottom of the line. This one had, steps in. I didn't have that. Mine was black with a black interior, with a 4-cylinder and a 5-speed. Didn't even have air conditioning, right? Steel wheels. I remember it being lower. I really want to emphasize that Jeeps have gotten taller, not just the roof, but the entry point. This, as I recall, felt wider, more roomy than the new ones, at what was a fraction of the price. Now, granted, we can talk about interest rates and inflation. But here's the deal. In 1995, somewhere in 95, maybe the beginning of 96, but I think it was 95, I bought a used Wrangler. And I think it was the 91. I may have been in 89, but I think it was a 91. It was like $10,000. Okay? And I'm sure you can go check your inflation calculator and tell me that's $30,000 today. And it probably is. But relative to my income, that was so unbelievably affordable. My first Jeep was $1,800. And if this vehicle was available today, I truly believe I would buy it right now. I truly believe it. And they don't have anything like that. You've got to have 6 cylinders and turbocharging and alloy wheels and everything else. And I kind of want a stripper Jeep. I really do. And I miss this. And I think this is a fantastic... AMC did it absolutely right. That's what I'm trying to say. It had a lot of criticism when it was new for the square headlights. I remember oodles of conversation about square headlights. Jeeps should have round headlights, and it's too wide. It won't fit down a trail like the old CJs would. But you know what? AMC nailed it. And I think this is truly one of the best Jeeps. When automobiles have compromises, all automobiles have compromises of pros and cons and what you give up and what you don't. This one, I believe, nailed it. Now, by today's standards, it's primitive. That dash is primitive. It's harsh. It rides poorly. It's everything. But I believe it nailed the moment. And it nailed Jeep as a utility. And at a price point. Love it. Absolutely love this vehicle. So for those of you who watch these and are like, well, he never likes anything, there you go. I love this. And I desperately wish I could get one today. Let me know your thoughts below, guys. I appreciate you being here.